I didn't hear Michael at first. The noise of the mower filled my head like a swarm of angry wasps, drowning everything else out. I was finishing off the last strip of grass closest to my neighbour's wall, being as quick as I could. The last hint of light was bleeding out of the sky, and I wanted to get back inside as soon as I could. A beer in front of the TV was calling. But when I reached the far end of the garden and cut the power, I heard a voice behind me. "Paul?" I jumped slightly. You know when you're so caught up in your own head, you forget your surroundings? My wife is back from holiday tomorrow. She's been off in Spain with a couple of her friends for the past week, and I've been thinking about my plan to meet her at the airport. Timings, when I need to leave, all that. I was in my own little bubble. The voice floating over my neighbour's garden punctured through it. I turned from the mower and stared over the low wall into the garden next to mine. I couldn't see anything at first. The sky was mostly dark overhead, and the only light spilling into the gardens came from a single street lamp on the road behind my house. It did little to shift the shadows. "Over here." I shifted my gaze and finally saw him. Michael, my new next-door neighbour. I'm pretty bad at guessing kids' ages, but I reckon he has to be around 10. He's got a shock of messy black hair and these big brown eyes. The kid's a starer too. I've only seen him a couple of times since he and his mum moved in last week, but every time I do, he gazes at me like I'm an animal in the zoo. It's a little annoying. This was the first time he'd actually spoken to me though. "Oh, hey, Michael, is it?" I actually knew his name perfectly well. I'd bumped into the estate agent selling the house next door and he told me, but I didn't want to appear over-familiar. "Yeah, I'm Michael, and you're Paul, my mum said." "That's me. How are you guys settling in?" "Okay, I guess." Michael stared up at me with those large brown eyes of his. I don't have much cause to talk to kids, so I may have been completely wrong about this, but I had the feeling Michael was making a lot more eye contact than someone his age normally would. He hardly even blinked. Young kids, at least in my limited experience, tend to be all over the place, little bags of energy, but Michael was the exact opposite. It's probably close to his bedtime, I found myself thinking. And then, off the back of that, you want to be glad he's not bouncing off the walls. If he was one of those kids, you'd never get any peace. Amazingly, considering they were still in the early moving stage, I'd barely heard a peep out of Michael and his mother. I'd been expecting to hear the sound of furniture shifting and boxes being lugged around all week, but I hadn't. They'd hardly made any noise at all. I'd hardly seen them at all for that matter. They'd arrived late one evening the previous week, and I'd caught a glimpse of them from the window of my study, but that was pretty much it. I remember Michael's mum as a tall, attractive woman who looked a little older than me, but I hardly even got a proper look at her face, and this conversation with Michael was the first interaction I'd had with either of them. I'll go round at some point when Beth's back home, I thought now, folding down the mower's handle. Then we can introduce ourselves properly. "So, Michael," I said, picking up the mower and carrying it back along the garden. "What are you and your mum up to this evening? I'm guessing it must be close to your bedtime soon." "Nah, nowhere near," he said. I chuckled. "Okay, well my bedtime's pretty early, so I'm going to head in and catch a bit of TV, I reckon. I'll see you around, yeah?" I reached the little wooden storage area at the end of the garden and slotted the mower underneath. I was on my way back to the door when Michael's voice stopped me. "Paul?" "What's up, mate? Do you always mow the garden so late?" I smiled. "No, I usually try to get it done when the sun's still out. Only my wife's back home tomorrow, and I wanted to get the place looking nice for her. I guess it must look pretty odd to be out here mowing at night, eh? Nah, I don't think so. I think everything's more fun at night. Oh yeah? Yeah, I go on adventures all the time. I could hear the excitement in Michael's voice, even though I couldn't see his face properly. He was just a shadowy outline in the darkness of his garden. One time, we even went night fishing. Have you ever been? I shook my head. I've been fishing once or twice, but only during the day. It's way more fun at night, I reckon. Everything's more sneaky at night. I found myself grinning again. Despite my urge to go back inside, the kid was sort of entertaining. Well, maybe you and your mum can show me and my wife sometime. Sounds like you guys are way more exciting than we are. I turned once more to the back door. This time, I was actually holding the handle when Michael's voice stopped me. Paul? Yes, buddy. Paul, do you have anything to drink? Like juice or anything? I hesitated. I'm not sure. I don't think I... Do you mind if I have a glass real quick? Mum's still sleeping, and she's been super tired this week. I don't want to wake her. I paused with my hand on the door. If Beth had been in, I probably would have said yes straight away, likely without even thinking about it. But standing there in the dark garden, I was suddenly aware that it might look a bit odd if I invited a 10-year-old into my house, even if he was my next door neighbour, and I doubted his mum would like the idea all that much. Do you not have anything to drink at your place, mate? My hand was still on the door, but I hadn't turned the handle yet. I stayed in the same position, my mind whirring with excuses. And when I heard a voice directly behind me, I almost jumped out of my skin. No, we don't have anything. I spun around and found Michael standing a foot away from me, staring up at me with those large brown eyes of his. The kid must have clambered over the garden wall while my back was turned. Must have done it without making a sound. Please, Paul, just a super quick drink, and then I'll go back home. I won't even sit down, I promise. I made a quick mental calculation in my head. Our back door opens straight into the kitchen, and I had orange juice in the fridge. Michael would probably be in and out in a couple of minutes. His mum might find it a little odd that he'd been inside the house if he told her. But wouldn't she find it just as odd if a new neighbour had refused her kid a drink when he asked? I hesitated for a couple more seconds, then sighed. Okay, go on then. But you have to make it quick, okay? I really want to go to bed soon. Michael smiled up at me and nodded. I turned the handle and stepped inside. So, you're a bit of a night owl, huh? What does that mean? I opened the fridge and grabbed the orange juice. It means someone who prefers it at night. You know, because you said you go on adventures, night fishing and stuff. I moved to the drying rack by the sink and grabbed a glass. Oh yeah, I'm definitely a night owl. I started pouring the juice into the glass. Man, not me. Or at least I wasn't when I was your age. I used to be scared of the dark. You'll get used to it. I said you get used to it once you spend enough time in it. Right. I turned and handed the glass of orange juice to Michael. He took it from me and smiled. He moved the glass towards his mouth, then paused, watching me over the rim. You know, my mum doesn't like me doing this anymore. Doing what? Going into houses with strangers? Not after last time. I stared down at the kid. He looked back up at me, the smile no longer on his face. Somewhere down in my stomach, I felt something uncomfortable squirm. What do you mean, mate? What happened last time? Michael glanced over his shoulder at the closed back door. as if he was checking to make sure his mum wasn't there. He moved the glass of orange juice away from his mouth and placed it on the kitchen counter. Then he shrugged. Nothing really. It's just that, in the place we used to live, I made friends with this old man who lived a couple of roads over from us. He invited me in for a drink too. Only then, he got weird. Oh, Jesus. I tried to keep my expression the same, but I was suddenly wishing I'd said no to the kid's drink request after all. This didn't sound good. Some old perv in his last town had invited him in for a drink, and then he got weird. How is his mum going to feel about him being on his own in my house now, given that something bad had clearly happened in the last place they lived? He got weird? The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. I should have just sent the kid packing there and then, but I guess my curiosity got the better of me. Michael shuffled on the spot, staring back at me. Yeah, he wanted me to come down to the basement with him. Told me he had this really cool Lego collection and asked if I wanted to see it. He insisted I see it, even when I said I had to go. My mouth suddenly felt dry. So, did you go with him? Michael shook his head back and forth, hard. No way. I ran back home. Mum told me I have to go only as far as the kitchen when I'm in a stranger's house. I felt mild relief wash over me. Then I replayed what Michael had just said, and felt the relief being replaced with confusion. Wait, how do you mean? I asked. Are you in strangers' houses a lot then? Like friends of your mum's and stuff? Michael opened his mouth, then closed it again. He turned and moved his hand back to the glass of orange juice on the kitchen side, but instead of picking it up, he only prodded it with his finger, sliding it over the surface. When he looked back at me, he carried on speaking as if he hadn't heard my question. Mum was really angry when she found out about the man. She made me promise I'd never, ever go back there. Did she tell anyone? About what the man said to you, I mean? No way. Michael looked away from me again. There was a slight smile on his face, like he was in on some joke I wouldn't understand. She did something way better than that. Oh yeah? What did she do? She made him disappear. I had my mouth open to ask another question when I realised what Michael had just said. The next thought I had was that I must have misheard him. What did you say? I said she made him disappear. I told you, night is the best time to hunt. Michael fixed me with those brown eyes of his. Only right then, they looked darker than brown. Almost black. I don't... I tried to find words, but I was at a loss. Michael smiled up at me. It's funny, he said after a moment. People think Mum won't come in unless she's invited, but they've got the rules all wrong. As long as one of us has already been invited, then it's fine. She can come back with me anytime she wants. The kid smiled at me once more. Don't worry, Paul. I'll tell her you were nice to me. Make sure she goes easy on you when you meet her. Thanks for the juice. He turned away and pulled the back door open. I found my eyes wandering over to the glass of orange juice, my mind vaguely aware that he hadn't touched a drop of it. But when Michael spoke one more time, I turned back to him. He was framed in the open doorway, half lost in the night. It'll take some getting used to, he said, but you won't be scared of the dark much longer. Before I had a chance to reply, he'd melted into the shadows. I only knew Michelle for a month, but it was truly a month to remember. I first met her when she was carving out my high school bully's eye with a butter knife, and we were more or less inseparable after that. She was a few years older than me, so of course I fell instantly in love, but I knew deep down we were destined for friendship and little else. I knew this deep down because she made it clear that she was going to die in roughly a month. Can't love a dead chick, she'd say. At first, I thought it was just a clever way to avoid the awkwardness of turning me down, but at some point, I came close to believing her. It was just something about her, something extremely free, careless and unconfined, refreshingly brave and outspoken and honest. When I met her, I was going through the most depressing period of my life. I was constantly bullied and belittled at school. My younger twin sisters were both hospitalized, each needing a transplant to survive. Jenna needed a heart, Chloe needed kidneys, and my parents had their hands full covering the medical expenses. I think we all, in our own ways, were on the verge of just giving up, of just letting go. I was saved by Michelle. I have no doubt about it. If she hadn't shown up when Brett was beating the hell out of me, I would have just ended my life that day. I was just so sick of it. Sick of the beating, sick of the abuse, sick of being alone. But Michelle came out of nowhere, threw him into the wall, knocked his nose halfway up into his brain, and proceeded to dig out his left eye with the aforementioned cutlery. He never touched me again. You'd think she'd get into trouble after doing something like that, but it was never reported. Brett claimed it had been an accident, that he'd crashed with his moped. I think he feared that Michelle would kill him if he said otherwise. I, for one, have no doubt she would have. That was just who she was. Michelle never went to school. She said it was because she knew she was going to die. Why bother with nonsense like school then? No, she was all about enjoying life to the fullest, kicking assholes in the face, screwing over people who screwed over others. She wanted to leave this world a better place than she found it, and by her logic, this was done exclusively by ridding it of dirtbags one way or another. "How do you know you're gonna die?" I asked her once. "My parents tell me," she said, "every day, and they're good for their word." She wouldn't explain it in detail, just that she was raised knowing the exact date and time of her death, down to the very second, and that it was meant to be. That's what they told her. In death, her life would have meaning. At first, I didn't think much of it, you know. She was just a crazy girl, and she always said weird stuff like that. I was kind of banking on it all being some bizarre joke or something. But when the month drew to a close, I was getting really worried it might all be true. I'd grown too attached to her. Every minute I wasn't at school or the hospital was spent with her, and the thought of losing her, my only friend, made me horribly depressed. That last week, I was really on edge. The twins were in bad shape, and my parents were spending every waking minute at the hospital. They had yet to find any donor matches, and time was running out. It felt like my time was running out too. The dark thoughts were returning, and I started imagining how I would end my life should Michelle ever leave me. I found it strange that she'd never invited me home. I mean, friends do that, right? Invite each other over. She'd been over to our house several times. She even crashed on the couch a few times, and we would often watch movies there, raid my parents' liquor cabinet, get wasted, and generally have fun. But I'd never been to her house. Not once. I didn't even know where she lived. So one night, I just decided to follow her. What was there to lose, really? Maybe I could get some answers from her parents or something. Some way to explain why she was so convinced she was dying. Maybe they lied to her. Some sort of cult? a way to form her beliefs into accepting the unacceptable, a way to control her. I stalked her for 30 minutes, lurking in the shadows as she paced down the street. When she headed to the outskirts, I started getting worried. And when she took the narrow trail through the forest, I was almost having a full-on panic attack. Where the hell was she heading? As far as I knew, there weren't any houses for miles. About halfway into the forest, I suddenly lost her. It was like she vanished without a trace. I walked back and forth, up and down, but there was just no sign of her at all. Eventually, I had to give up and return home, my mind growing ever darker. I remember the last day like it was yesterday. Every minute of it, crisp and clear and vivid in my mind. Every scent, every sound, every muscle moving on a perfect face. All those smiles and kind words. Everything. The last day came and went, but I didn't know it was the last day. If I'd known, I would have told her how much I cared for her, how much she meant to me, how much I owed her my life and sanity. Without her, I wouldn't be alive. But I didn't know, and I never told her. I hope she somehow realized it, that she could see it in my eyes and actions every day, but I could never be sure. She just acted so normal, you know. She was Michelle that day too. Same carefree spirit, the same wild, devil-may-care attitude. We spent the afternoon smoking weed, watching silly cartoons, laughing, and just enjoying each other's company. But when she left, I knew something was up. I don't know how. I guess there was some details, some little thing that alarmed me. But having replayed and analysed that day over and over in my mind, I can't think of anything. Nothing. But I knew. So, I followed her again. This time I stayed closer, always having her in my sights, always knowing exactly where she was. She was walking considerably slower that night, almost like she knew I was behind her, almost like she wanted me to follow her. The air was cold and crisp, and whenever autumn drew close, I can step outside, take a deep breath, and relive the exact moment when she suddenly turned on her heels to face me. "This is it," she said. "This is the day I die." She walked over to me and handed me an envelope. It was light, but there was definitely something in it. A letter, perhaps. "You will need this." She stroked my hair gently. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do with it." "I don't understand," I said. "Please, let's just leave. Let's just get out of here." She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. If I concentrate real hard, I can still conjure up the smell of her perfume. "This is goodbye," she murmured softly. "But you will come to understand that it was always meant to be." I reached out to hug her when they emerged from the darkness. Two tall figures clad in dark robes. An old man and an elderly woman, their milky white hair flowing gently in the breeze. They had this solemn expression on their faces, the kind you'd see in funerals, an expression of acceptance to sorrow and despair, because it is just a part of life. Michelle pushed me away forcefully, and by the time I regained my balance, it was already too late. Her throat had been slit from either side of her neck, a perfect cross, left to right, right to left. Blood was squirting out, colouring the dull brown of the roadside a deep shade of crimson. The robed couple swiftly stepped back into the shadows, leaving me desperately clutching the lifeless body of Michelle, screaming my lungs out, wailing like an animal into the cold night. The paramedics came 10 minutes later. I have no idea who called them. Anonymous, they later told me. She had no ID on her, so they asked me a bunch of questions. I didn't know the answer to any of them. She was Michelle. That was all I knew. Her name was Michelle. She was my friend, and she was the best person I'd ever met. They let me ride the ambulance to the hospital, but they quickly pronounced her dead. She lost too much blood, they told me. It wasn't my fault. There wasn't anything I could have done. This didn't offer me much comfort. I was devastated, totally broken, the dark thoughts resurfacing once again, this time with more power than ever before. "What's that in your hand?" one of the paramedics asked. "Does that belong to Michelle?" I glanced at the envelope. It was completely drenched in blood, much like me. And then it suddenly hit me. I don't know what it was, but it was like she told me, when the time comes, you'll know what to do with it. So, without thinking, I just handed it over to them. He sort of held it up, like he'd somehow see through it if he got a better angle of it, before he gently opened it. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. I am better now. I still have problems understanding what happened, but I am better. I've come to terms with it, with the fact that everything happened just the way it was supposed to happen, and it has shaped me, shaped my life into what I am today. Michelle didn't just save me, she saved my entire family, every aspect of my life. And I guess you're wondering what was in that envelope. Maybe you'd figured it out, maybe not. It was a donor card, and as it turned out, she was a perfect match for my twin sisters. "Can't love a dead chick," she'd said. That's the only thing she was ever wrong about. My great-great-grandmother, Virginia Sanderson Adams, passed away a few weeks ago at the age of 111. Her advanced age placed her in the human longevity category of supercentenarian, and one of only a few hundred people in the entire world living beyond the age of 110. Grandma Virginia didn't consider her situation to be anything special. In fact, to some degree, she felt her age was a curse. At the mention of the blessing of her extraordinary longevity, she always replied with, "The longer you live, the more loved ones you must grieve for." I've always found supercentenarians fascinating and wish I'd gotten to know my great-great-grandmother a bit more. She lived on the other side of the country, so I had only met her once, when I was 19 years old and she was 91. I recall embarrassingly little about that visit, because at 19, I was too wrapped up in my own life to think about the significance of hers. Today, at 39, when one is much more aware of their own mortality, what wouldn't I give for the opportunity to pick through the time capsule in her head? I imagine the stories and the memories that could be sorted through and plucked out of there that very likely could provide personal accounts of some of the most significant moments of a history long before pocket cameras and 24-hour news. My newfound interest in my great-great-grandmother's life compelled me to volunteer my assistance with the careful process of logging, removing, and redistributing the contents of the house she inhabited for 80 years. I traveled from Pittsburgh to Elko, Nevada, where she had lived with her husband, who was killed in an accident in a gold mine in the winter of 1944. As I and other family members sorted through what was essentially a tangible history of her exceptionally long life, I quite literally stumbled upon a trunk containing, among other things, a stack of correspondence that created a story that, I'm still not quite sure, I believe. Although the letters are a complete two-way correspondence, the events described are not primarily about Grandma Virginia. For all intents and purposes, this story is about her twin sister, Dorothy Sanderson Mullins, and the extended nightmare that had befallen her in 1934 Oklahoma, living in the Dust Bowl during the height of America's Great Depression. January 14th, 1934. Dearest sister, I hope this letter finds you in happiness and good health. I felt it would be a good time to check on you and Jim and see how things are in Oklahoma. I have heard there has been a drought there for quite some time. How are your crops? Still growing well, I hope. And how is your little one, Jacob? He must be 6 or 7 years old now, if I recall correctly. Things are going well here in Elko. Jonathan is working for a gold mine, and they have been extracting tremendous amounts for the past year. It is certainly a wonderful time to be in the business of precious metals, and I pray the good fortune will come. Well, I must be going. Jonathan will be home soon, so I should get supper started. All my love, Virginia. February 7th, 1934. Sweet Virginia, it is so good to hear your voice, even if it's only on the paper before me. I do have my health and happiness, but things here in Oklahoma are not going well at the moment. The drought hit our area hard, and the crops were gone by midsummer last year. Water is getting harder and harder to pump from the well, and grain for the livestock has almost run out. Our savings account is empty as of a week ago, and the mortgage on the farm has come due. Jim went to California nearly a month ago to find work, and we haven't heard from him since. I figure he's been working hard to get his feet under him, and I should receive a letter and a few dollars any day now. Jacob is well. You're right, he's 7 years old and full of energy. I believe he'll grow up to be a big, strong boy like his daddy, and be a real help on the farm. Food is getting scarce now, but I make sure he's eating well by giving him some of my portions too. I can get by just fine with a little less in my belly. Love, Dorothy. March 1st, 1934. Dearest sister, I am checking in with you to see if things are improving. I have included a small sum of money to help with your needs. I know you are not someone who desires charity, but the gold mine is still producing a great deal, and we've managed to retain a bit of Jonathan's pay every week. I trust Jim has sent a letter by this time and some money to help you get by while he works out west. All my love, Virginia. April 26th, 1934. Sweet Virginia, I'm sorry for the delay in responding to your letter, but I have wonderful news. A few days after my last letter was sent, Jim returned home. It was great to see him, but I feared that meant he was unable to find work. Although he didn't find a steady job, he came back with something better than money. While on the road in Texas and a few others, Jim came across a farm that was growing so well he wouldn't have believed it had it not been right in front of him. The soil in that part of Texas is as bad as it is here in Oklahoma, but all sorts of vegetables are growing to huge sizes, and the pickers' baskets were overflowing. The man would only allow Jim and the others to work for a couple weeks, but he sent each man home with a nice bit of money and some special seeds. Jim and the others learned the correct way to plant and cultivate those seeds, and the man told Jim if he followed those instructions here at home, the vegetables will grow taller than the barn. The money you sent helped us get through a tough spot. You have my sincerest gratitude, and when I see you again, I'll return your generosity. As for the farm, it's still early, but Jim planted those seeds, and the crops are already sprouting faster than I've ever seen. We're very hopeful for a good season now. Love, Dorothy. May 19th, 1934. Dearest sister, it brings such joy to my heart to hear of your good fortune. How are things now? Jonathan and I are very anxious to hear the results of the special seeds and the big harvest that is surely headed your way. I have no doubt that Jim's hard work will pay off and the crops will provide what you need. Things here in Elko are moving along splendidly. The mine is producing more gold than ever, and Jonathan has become quite popular with the men in charge of the company. They have promoted him to head foreman. It seems both of us are receiving the Lord's blessings. All my love, Virginia. June 11th, 1934. Sweet Virginia, I'm so glad to hear of Jonathan's success at the mine. Jobs are so difficult to get these days, so the two of you are blessed beyond measure. The farm is alive and well with nature's bounty. The crops have exploded beyond belief, and we're already selling bushels and bushels at the market. Things are going so well that Jim has been able to hire a few friends and neighbours to help out. He needs the help pretty bad. The poor man has been so very tired recently. His walks have slowed some, and he carries himself like an old man at times. I told him once we get the crops under control, he needs to take some time off. He agreed, and we left it at that. He does still have his appetite though, and even seems to be eating nearly 2 or 3 times his normal portions. I suppose even at 27, he's still a growing boy. We shared some seeds from the new crops, but they just don't seem to sprout for any of the neighbouring farms. It's such a sad thing to see. Some of the fellas asked him for the location of the man with the farm in Texas so they can go get the special seeds for themselves, but Jim wouldn't tell them. He said we would share as much of our crops as they needed, and it would be best not to go to Texas. The men didn't agree and were pretty angry when they left. I asked him about it when he came into the house and got short with me and said not to speak of it again. My sweet husband has never spoken to me like that, but I respect his wishes about it. As I said before though, he seems so tired and worn down, and he's got a cut on his forearm that won't seem to heal. I dress it as best I can, but the next day it looks like a fresh wound again. A few days ago, I went to the barn to fetch my dear Jim and found him bent over in the back corner, holding his arm with blood dripping to the ground. I interrupted him and asked what he was doing back there. He said he had bumped that cut into a bale of hay and opened it back up. He asked me not to come in the barn anymore because the roof needs some repairs and it's not safe right now. It looked fine to me, but I'm sure he's right. I do hope Jim can heal up and regain some energy soon. Jacob's 8th birthday is in a few days, and I have a special cake planned. Well, I must be going. I need to get Jacob his bath ready. Love, Dorothy. June 9th, 1934. Dearest sister, Jonathan and I are happy beyond words to hear of the successes of your farm. The Lord's blessings are shining brightly in Oklahoma. I hope that Jim has managed to get a few days off since you last wrote me, and I hope the cut on his arm has healed properly. It is a dangerous thing to have a wound exposed for so long. Jonathan and I have discussed coming for a visit. Work at the mine has slowed a bit, and after all his hard work, Jonathan is due for a bit of time away. Please let me know when it would be a good time for a visit, and we will make our travel arrangements. I'm very much looking forward to wrapping my arms around my beautiful sister for the first time in ages. Please offer Jacob my belated birthday wishes. All my love, Virginia. August 28th, 1934. Dearest sister, I've yet to receive a response to my last letter, and Jonathan and I are concerned for the well-being of your family. We know you are most likely overwhelmed with the success of the farm, but please send a little note soon to put our worried minds at ease. Also, please let me know when we can travel to visit you. All my love, Virginia. September 21st, 1934. Sweet Virginia, I'm sorry for not responding sooner, but things here at the farm have taken a dreadful turn. My sweet husband has gone to be with the Lord in heaven. Even this late in the year, the crops have showed no signs of slowing, We have many men helping with the harvest, but still the vegetables grow and spread. If our helpers weren't working nearly around the clock, the crops would have likely swallowed our home entirely. Just 10 days ago, I came into the kitchen to find a string of half-runner beans had grown in from outside. I followed it through the kitchen and into the bedroom, where it had run across the floor, climbed the bedpost, and was within just inches of Jim's arm. My dear husband's health had continued to deteriorate to the point that he could hardly get out of bed in the morning, so I finally put my foot down and insisted he see a doctor. He again refused, but did agree to take a few days off. I suggested he allowed Jacob a bit more responsibility. I saw a flash of what looked like fear in his eyes, and he said no. But I stood firm on it, and he finally agreed, as long as it was only for a couple of days. After supper, he took Jacob out to the barn to show him what needed to be done in his absence. Jim never got out of bed again though, and passed away 2 days later. Jacob has been such a blessing after the death of his daddy. He has continued to work the farm, faithfully tending to his duties in the barn, then helping the men with these seemingly endless crops. The poor boy has been working so hard, and I can see the exhaustion in him now. He's even walking with a bit of a limp, although he won't let me take a look at it. I'm feeding him as much as I can to keep his strength up, but it never seems to be enough. Still, he is up with the sun every morning and doesn't return until supper time. I must go now. I need to deliver Jim's best suit of clothes to the funeral home for the services tomorrow. Please say a prayer for us as we begin our lives without him. Love, Dorothy. October 9th, 1934. Dearest sister, God rest Jim's poor soul. Only 27 years old. My heart is breaking for you at this time, and Jonathan is beside himself with grief. You and Jacob are in our prayers, night and day. Output from the mine has reached full capacity again, so we'll be unable to get away to see you as soon as we would like, but Jonathan expects to have some time off by Thanksgiving. Please write me as soon as possible, so we may make our arrangements for a holiday visit. Our deepest sympathies, Virginia. December 1st, 1934. Dearest sister, it has been over 2 months since I've heard from you. Jonathan and I had hoped to be able to spend Thanksgiving with you and cheer you and Jacob up after the tragic loss of your husband, but those days have come and gone without a word from you. We are very concerned for your well-being. Please respond as soon as you receive this letter. All my love, Virginia. March 13th, 1935. Hello, Mrs. Adams. My name is Mary Alice Webster. I am the new owner of your sister Dorothy's farm just outside of Boise City, Oklahoma. I have begun this letter several times, then changed my mind because I couldn't bear the thought of sending you this kind of news. Around the middle of November last year, your sister went to fetch her son, Jacob, for supper and found him dead from exhaustion. As I understand it, his father Jim died the same way. Workers nearby said they heard a scream from the barn, and when she emerged carrying a dead son, she was screaming, "It was the blood," over and over, although to this day, no one knows what she meant by it. Poor Dorothy entered the house, laid her son on the bed, then moved to the sitting room where she discharged the shotgun into her mouth. I am so sorry for your tremendous loss. Along with this letter, I've included a few photographs and keepsakes that were saved from the bank auction. Included with them is a stack of letters Dorothy had been receiving from you. Please know that I did not read them. My husband, Otha, and I just moved from Oklahoma from Nebraska, hoping to make a new start after the loss of our own infant child. We have been very encouraged by the stories of the endless bounty that befell this property last year, and we're delighted with the price we secured at the auction for such a desired piece of land. Otha has been quite optimistic about this growing season and was over the moon when he found a small envelope filled with seeds tucked beneath a peculiar looking root in the back of the barn. We are certainly grateful to Mr. Jim for that. He'd even left instructions for the best way to plant and tend to them, but Otha won't share the details with me. He says it must be kept a secret. Men can be so silly sometimes. Again, Mrs. Adams, I am so very sorry for your loss. May the Lord bless you and keep you always. Sincerely, Mary Alice Webster, 1935. Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or the kitchen when they walk by, and it always starts at exactly 3:03. The sound is faint at first, somewhere near the beginning of the lane near the Carson place. We're towards the middle of the street, so the whistling moves past us before fading away in the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen, and Mom and Dad didn't like that, and we'd catch hell if they found us. But they were never too hard on us since we always stuck to one big rule. Don't try to look at whatever was whistling. My neighbourhood is a funny place. I've lived here since I was 6 and I love it. The houses are small and well kept, good-sized yards, plenty of places to roam. There are a lot of other kids here my age. I turned 13 back in October. We grew up together and would always play foursquare in the cul-de-sac or roam around back porch to back porch in the summer. This was a good place to grow up. I'm old enough to see it. And there's only the two strange things here: the night whistling and the good luck. The whistling never bothered me much. Like I said, I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom. But Mum and Dad don't like talking about it, so I've stopped asking questions. My dad is a strong guy, tall and calm. He has an accent since he moved to the US as a kid. His family, my grandparents, they're from the islands. That's what they call it. My dad, the only time he isn't so calm is if the whistler comes up. He talks a little quicker then, eyes move faster, and he tells us not to think about it so much and to always remember the one rule, the big rule. Don't try to look outside when the whistler goes past. Not that we could look, even if we wanted. See, there are shutters on the inside of every window, thick pieces of heavy canvas that pull down from the top and latch to the bottom of the window frame. Each latch even has a small lock, about the size of what you'd find on a diary. My dad locks those shutters every night before we all go to bed and keeps the key in his room. My mom, I don't know what she thinks of the whistling. I've seen her out in the living room before at 3:03 when the sound starts. I could see her if I cracked my door open just an inch to peek. She's not out there often. At least I haven't caught her much. But once or twice a month, I think she sits out there on our big red couch, just listening. The whistler has the same tune every night. It's cheerful. Remember how I said there are two odd things about where I live? Well, besides our night whistler, everyone in my neighbourhood is really lucky. It's hard for us to explain, and Dad doesn't like us talking about this part much either. But good things just seem to happen to people around here a lot. Usually it's small things, winning a radio contest, or getting an unexpected promotion at work, or finding some arrowheads buried in the backyard. You know, the authentic kind. The weather is pretty good, and there's no crime, and everyone's gardens bloom extra bright in the fall. A million little blessings, I've heard my mom say about living here. But the main reason we stay here, why we moved here in the first place, is my sister Nola. She was born very sick, something with her lungs. We couldn't even bring her home when she was born, only visit her in the hospital. She was so small, I remember. Small, even compared to the other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into our house here to be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved here, Nola started getting better. The doctors couldn't figure it out. They chalked it up to whatever they were doing, but we could all tell they were confused. But my parents knew. Even I knew. Nola getting better was just another of the million little blessings we got for living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed, even after we found out that for every small miracle that happens here every day, now and then some bad things happen. But they only happen if you look for the whistler. See, our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They showed up with a macaroni casserole and a gift basket and a manila envelope whenever someone new moves in. They're very friendly. 4 people showed up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made a small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week out of the hospital, so they were extra careful. Then, the committee asked to speak to my parents in private, so I was sent to my room, where I still managed to hear nearly every word. The welcoming committee told my parents about how nice the neighborhood was. Really exceptionally, hard to explain kind of nice. And then they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that happened every morning at 3:03 and ended at the tick of 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my parents that the whistling was quiet, would never harm or hurt us, as long as we didn't look for what was making the sound. This part they stressed, and I pushed my ears into the door, straining to hear them. People who went looking for the whistler had their luck changed, sometimes tragically. A black cloud would hang over anyone that looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope the committee brought over contained newspaper clippings, stories about car crashes and ruined lives, public deaths and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my dad, but life goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again, no presence. My mom, I could tell, she wasn't taking it seriously. She kept asking if this was some prank they play on new neighbors. At one point, my mom got angry, accused the committee of trying to scare us out of our new home, asked them if they were racist on account of my dad being from the islands. My dad calmed her down, told her he could tell our new neighbors were sincere and they were just trying to help us. He explained that he grew up hearing these kinds of stories from his mom and that he knew there were strange things that walked among us. Some of those strange things were good, and some were bad, but most were just different. After the committee left, my dad went out to the hardware store, bought the canvas blinds, the latches and the locks, and installed them on every window in the house after dinner. That first night in our new house, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m, only to find my dad awake, sitting on the living room couch, holding my baby sister. My dad held up his finger in a shh motion, but patted the couch next to him. I sat, and we waited. At exactly 3:03, we heard the whistling. It came and it went, just like our neighbors said. The whistling returns each night, and we never look, and we enjoy our million little blessings every day. Nola breathes on her own, and she's grown into a strong, clever girl. My dad even joined the welcoming committee. We don't get new neighbors often. Why would anyone want to leave? But when a new family moves in, my dad and the committee bring the macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and the manila envelope. I can always tell by the look on my dad's face when he comes back if the family took the committee seriously or if we'd be getting new neighbours again very soon. Not long ago, a family moved directly next to us. The previous owner, Miss Maddie, passed away at age 105. She'd lived a good, long life. Our new neighbours seemed like they'd fit in just fine. They believed the welcoming committee, took my dad's advice about the locking shutters since they had a young child of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in that manila envelope, whatever evidence, my dad never let us see. But it must have been awfully convincing because our neighbours got along with no issue for the first month. One night, when our new neighbours had to leave town, they sent their son, Holden, to stay with us. He was 12, a year under me in school. I didn't know him well before that night, but as soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell it was going to be a bad time. "Do you know who is always out there whistling every night?" Holden asked the moment the adults left the room. The three of us were sitting in the den, some Disney movie playing idly on the television. My sister and I exchanged a glance. "We don't talk about that," I said. "I think it's that weirdo that lives in the big yellow house on the corner," Holden said. "Mr. Tolls?" my sister asked. "No way, he's really nice." Holden shrugged. "Must be a psycho killer then." Nola tensed. "We don't talk about it," I repeated. "Let's go in my room and play Nintendo." We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and then watching movies. A typical sleepover. But I could see Holden was getting antsy. After my parents had wished us a good night, locked the blinds, and gone to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to where Nolan and I were sitting on my bed. "Have you ever even tried looking?" he asked. "It's nearly time." Like most sleepovers, we'd conveniently ignored any suggestion of a bedtime. I was shocked to see he was right. It was almost 3 a.m. I sighed. "We don't... See, I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key," he continued, ignoring me. "So does our dad," said Nola. "No," replied Holden. "No, he doesn't." "You saw him do it," I said, a little sharper than I meant to sound. Holden grinned. "Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his normal keychain." "So?" I asked, worried I already knew what he would say next. Because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all these years, because he knew we took it seriously. "So, after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom, and on my way, I may have peeked into their room, and I may have seen your dad's keychain on his nightstand, and I maybe went and borrowed the key to the blinds." Nola and I stared, and his grin only grew wider. "You're lying," I said. Holden shrugged. "You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look. You'll see his keychain right there on the nightstand." "Stay here," I told both of them. "Don't move a muscle." I hurried over to my parents' room, but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry. Beyond angry. I was scared thinking about it, but more scared of an open window with a whistler right outside. I opened the door, barely an inch, and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps into the dark, I froze. The whistling started, and I could hear it clearly. from my parents' room. I never realized, but they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling come closer, unsure whether I should turn on the light or call out for my dad. Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. "Nola!" I yelled, running out to my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door next to a window. Nola wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with a lock on one of the blinds. I heard a click. He did have a key. Holden let out a quick laugh. Nola stood next to him, hunched up, afraid but maybe curious. The whistling was right outside our house now. I think I made a sound. Called out, I can't remember. Time felt frozen. Clock hands nailed to the face. But I found myself moving. I'm not fast. I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden pull the blind all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling just on the other side of the window. But I had my arms around Nola, and I turned her so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut. The blind whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking in my arms. "Don't look, okay?" I told her. "Don't turn around." We were positioned so that she was facing back towards the hallway and I was facing the window. My eyes were still closed and I felt a nod into my shoulder. I reached out with the arm not holding Nora and tried to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. "Holden?" I asked. Silence. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window. Eyes still sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingertips, colder than it should have been for the time of year. I moved my hand up the window, searching for the string to the blind. The glass began to get warmer the farther I reached, and there was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blind shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light leaking out from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. "Holden?" I asked again. He turned towards me, and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of motion. Lights sparked to life in the hall, then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look back at them. My eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale. He had bit his lips so hard there was a thin line of blood running down his chin, and he'd wet himself. "What happened?" my dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel away from Holden and look back. He looked. I'd never seen my dad scared before, but I saw it that night. In that moment, an old, ugly terror stitched on his face. A parent's fear. "Just Holden?" he mouthed to me. I nodded, yes. My dad let out a breath. He looked so relieved I nearly expected him to cheer. But then he turned to Holden, and my dad's face changed. I wondered if he felt bad for feeling good that Holden was the only one that looked. There was a knock at the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. "Don't answer it," my mom said. She stood at the threshold of the hallway. I'd always thought she was a skeptic and just humored my dad about the windows and the whistler. But that night, we were all believers. I noticed that both of my parents held baseball bats they must have taken from their bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. "Please, don't open the door," Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him, hugged him close. "We won't," my dad promised, still holding his bat. "Nothing is coming in here tonight." Thud, thud, thud. This time, the knocking was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again, and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and knelt down next to us, wrapping my sister and me close. Thud, thud, thud. "Call the police," my mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. "Do you think?" He was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off to a polite tap, tap, tap. "Police," something said from the other side of the door. The voice from outside sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the words back to her. "Police, call the police." Tap, tap, tap. "Police." My mom pulled us closer. "Police, police, police, police." "Please stop," I heard her whisper to herself. "I don't think calling them will help," my dad said. "How will we know when they're the ones at the door?" The knocking came back harder than before. The door shook. Then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. We all turned together towards the back door, but the knocking immediately returned to the front door. Front to back, back to front, loud then quiet, then loud again. Suddenly, the sound was coming from both doors at once. Big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer. Then something started rapping against all the windows in the house, then the walls. It was like we were living inside a drum with a dozen people trying to play it at once. Or we were a turtle, and something was attempting to claw us out of our shell. "Stop!" Holden yelled. The knocking died. "I won't tell," Holden said, staring at the door. "I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Just please go away." We waited for nearly a minute. Then we heard it. A soft tap, 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 coming from the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner, watching gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushed his hair, but never lied to him, never told him things would be okay. The tapping at the window went on for the rest of the night. We huddled together in the living room for I don't know how long. Eventually, my mom tried to take us kids into my room while my dad stayed to watch the door. But the second we moved into my bedroom, the knocking came back. So loud it was impossible to ignore. I was afraid the door couldn't take it. We went back to the living room and the knocking stopped. Only the tap, tap, tap on the window remained. None of us slept that night. The tapping stopped around 7 a.m. That's about the time the sun comes up here. We waited another 2 hours before my dad opened the blinds from one window. He made us all go back to my parents' bedroom first. I heard him open the door, then come back in. "Okay," he told us. "It's done." Holden's parents came back around lunchtime. My mom and dad walked Holden over to his house, and they all went inside for quite a while. Nola and I watched from the window, She stuck to me the whole day, right at my side, sometimes holding my hand. When my parents came back, they looked grim, but wouldn't tell us what they said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we all spent the day together, ordered pizza and watched movies. That night, everyone slept in my room. Nola and my mom in the bed with me, my dad in a chair he'd pulled over. There was no knocking that night, or any night since. We didn't see much of Holden or his parents for the rest of that week, but by Thursday, there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nola and I watched them packing up the whole afternoon after school. What sticks with me most is how tired Holden and his parents looked. All three had the same pallor, grim mouths, and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell something was very wrong. Holden and his family were gone before sunset. I remember what the original welcoming committee said to my parents when we moved in. Not everyone who looks at the Whistler dies, but even those that live have a light go out of them, and the rest of their lives are full of misfortune. A million little tragedies. I think Holden's parents must have looked, either to comfort him if they didn't believe, or share the burden if they did. I watched Nola some days, happy and young and alive, and I wonder if I'd been slower, if she'd looked out the window that night. Would I have too? To comfort her, to share that burden? I'm glad I don't have to find out. It's been 2 months since the night Holden stayed here. We still live in that house, in that neighbourhood. We still hear our Whistler walking past every night. The blessings, the luck, the good things here are too good to leave. But be careful. We don't have friends over to spend the night anymore, and my dad hides the key to the blinds very, very well. Not that I've gone looking. There are some things you just don't need to look for. My girlfriend, now fiancée, Hayley, had the tiniest chihuahua I ever saw. It was like a long, scrawny potato that yapped. As a joke, I learned how to crochet and made an ugly Christmas sweater for her chihuahua. She showed it to her friends. All of them, I guess, online friends. Friends at work, friends at church. I think she showed it to strangers. People at the supermarket, people at the gym, anyone who didn't get away fast enough. Then she posted pics online. That is how it all started. A gag gift for my girl's tiny dog. I had to start business to keep up with the requests. I'm that Mr. Nice Guy who doesn't tell people no. Could I crochet a sweater for your lizard? Sure. Could I crochet a silly warmer for your boyfriend? Sure. Could I crochet nipple warmers for your sister? Sure. At first, I didn't even charge for the stuff I made, but it got to the point where I was spending a lot of time researching and figuring out how to make all these custom things. I thought I needed something for my time. I started my business, worked up how to charge for various items, and worked on basic designs for things that might be repeats. Hooked on Gags was the name I went with. That name got me business I hadn't counted on. I think some people misunderstood gags. Pretty soon, I was crocheting up all kinds of fetish type stuff. Halter tops with collars, wrist restraints, fishnet body stockings, ski masks, lace gloves, stockings. I quit my day job because I just didn't have enough time to fill my orders. Priorities, man. It was either quit my day job, which is now paying less per hour than my crochet gig, or hire employees to crochet what was ordered. Hiring people was a headache I really didn't want. So one day, I get a call from a guy who wanted me to come to his place and design a new wardrobe for his girlfriend. 7 outfits or more. I tried to say no, but he was willing to pay for my travel there. It was an hour-and-a-half drive, so I told him it would cost $75 just for me to drive out there and talk through what he wanted, whether he ordered anything or not. Plus, it was in the middle of BFE. Then I let him know if I had to design anything to fit the order, the base charge for design was $25 an hour. That was okay with him too. We set a date and time, and then I went back to doing what I was doing, crocheting probably my 20th set of black fishnet stockings. I found it weird during the phone call that he told me his girlfriend's name, Cythera. Weird name too, and he made a big point of it. There was a strange vibe going on, but it would mean a little money in my pocket at the very least, with the cost of an afternoon's worth of time. It would also look good if I put consulting on my business card along with the crochet, if I ever got around to making my business cards. On a Sunday afternoon, just after lunch with my girl, I packed up the car and left for the client's home. The place wasn't too tough to find once I made the last turn onto his road. The house was in the middle of nothing, sticking up like a hurt finger. The grass was burned down by the lack of rain, and leaves blew across the path, tamped down by who knows how many feet, who knows how long ago. There was no driveway, so I just pulled up into the front yard. The black iron fence was right up close around the house, so it looked like a haunted house or something out of a horror flick. In my head, I heard, "Don't go in there." It didn't help that the guy's first name was Mortimer, and my mind went straight to Mortician. He didn't sound spooky on the phone, but Jesus, what a place. Up the creaky front steps I went. The porch was covered in dead vines, dead twigs and dead leaves. Mort's place was getting my vote for best Halloween decorations. It was November, but he was still winning the contest. I lifted the huge-ass brass door knocker. It was a lion's head. I expected a huge, creepy butler to answer, so I was surprised to see a totally ordinary guy on the other side of the door. Jeans, t-shirt, ordinary height. Maybe he carried 10 extra pounds. It was the kind of weight that's hard to lose. He greeted me, told me to call him Mort, and stuck out his hand. As I looked down to shake his hand, I'm a big guy, I noticed he was wearing house slippers. It was a weird thing to notice, but it genuinely was the only thing that stood out for me. No male in my family or circle of friends ever wore slippers. I thought of my granddad's term for henpecked husband, pantoffelheld, which means a hero in slippers. "Come in," Mort said. In contrast to the creepy old haunted house exterior, it looked like a life-size Barbie house inside. Everything was a shade of pink, gold, or off-white. Not a speck of dust was to be seen. It was museum-level clean. "Come and meet Cythera." He led me into the living room where Cythera was sitting on a dark pink couch. Something seemed off. Yeah, everything about everything was off about Mort in this place, but there was something strange about her. She wasn't moving. I got a couple of steps closer and realized she was a doll. I stood there, not knowing what the hell to say. "Sweetheart," he said, "this is Elliot." He looked at me. Finally, I said, "Nice to meet you." Apparently, that was some kind of sign. Mort started talking a mile a minute. Cythera was picky and had definite tastes in all things, and favourite colours. I thought pink, gold and off-white. She needed all new clothes and really wanted a custom look. She needed things for each season and every kind of occasion, birthdays, holidays, anniversary, dinner and dancing. The whole time he talked, I was still trying to think of what to say. I was never introduced to a damn doll before. Finally, he shut up and just looked at me. I tried to keep my neutral face. Okay, I'm going to sketch up a couple things, and then you tell me if it's the kind of stuff you're looking for. I pulled out my sketchbook. If you decide on any of it, I'll need to take measurements. Of course. I've never been a great artist, so I was drawing only the basic strokes. A halter top and shorts, a cardigan sweater, a lacy gown, like those doily things, yoga pants, a bikini bathing suit, a beanie and scarf. Mort wanted all of it. I sketched a Christmas sweater and a headband with Easter bunny ears. He laughed and wanted those too. Basically, everything I sketched he wanted. Then he made an ask. Leopard print leggings. At one point I said, "You've already picked out like $1,000 in clothes. She is worth every penny, aren't you, Cythera?" It didn't seem to bother him that she didn't answer. He made up her emotions and words. She is so excited about these clothes. She likes yoga pants and leggings the best, but she likes the gown too. She likes it all. He looked at her. She'll need more. So, can you make more sketches? Sure. Can I have more time, like a week, to put together more stuff? He was so excited about that. I asked if I could email him the sketches, and he was good with that. Now came the tough part though, measuring a doll. He was such a strange guy, and he had this fixation with the doll. I didn't want to trigger some crazy-ass fit because I touched it or got close to it. I was sort of toying with the idea of having him measure it for me. "Cythera, sweetheart," he suddenly said, "Elliot has to measure you." He looked at me. She's really ticklish, so you can't touch her ribs or feet. Without warning, he asked, "Can we talk in the next room for a minute?" He didn't want the doll to overhear something? Christ. "Okay," I said, following him into the dining room. I don't want her to get embarrassed. She's a really private, shy person. I bit my tongue. She wants some of those sexy things you make too, like the fishnet dress and the bodysuit. Can you sketch some more stuff like that too? I agreed, but I couldn't just let it go at that. I was going to open my mouth. I knew I shouldn't, but the whole situation was killing me. I'd been holding in laughter and a few grunts and sighs. He was a client, so I couldn't say what I really felt, but I was dying to say something. Cythera is a kind of unusual name. Where did it come from? He gave me an alarmed look. "Please don't mention it in front of her," he said in low tones. "It gets her upset. She was traumatized. She was called a synthetic therapy service doll. I couldn't call her that, so I made a name out of it. S-I instead of a Y, Thera, for therapy. Please don't say anything in front of her. She has so many bad memories of that place and how they treated her and her sisters." Okay, this was definitely a walk on the weird side. On the way back to the living room, Mort paused in the doorway and said, "Isn't she adorable? I have to get my phone." While I stood there with my mouth open, Mort took pictures of Cythera from every damn angle. All this time, I hadn't taken a good look at the doll. I mean, it made me uncomfortable, like I was seeing something about a stranger that I shouldn't see. It was like walking into a guy's house and he has a pair of underpants on his dining room table. You don't want to look. I didn't want to look at his doll. He probably screwed that thing. I thought he would quit after 4 or 5 pictures. Apparently, Cythera was being just too cute, so he had to get more. I sort of snuck a peek at her face. Huh. She looked Eurasian, with light brown hair and almond green eyes. Her skin was so delicate looking. She had eyelashes, not big, long, hooker stripper eyelashes. They were like real eyelashes, short and fairly straight. She had light pink lipstick on. Otherwise, she wasn't wearing any makeup. Nope, I looked away. This is probably how Mort got suckered into buying a doll. He looked into its face and got hooked. I mean, that skin, those lips. What the hell? I'm sorry to interrupt you, man, I said, but I have to get back for a meeting this evening. After a flurry of apologies from Mort, I walked closer and paused. This was a note for me, too. Mort, I don't want to set her off on a laughing spree. Can you measure her while I write it down? Stupid ass that I was, I thought that was better than maybe touching her or triggering him. Mort took his time measuring her. He had to talk to her. Oh, sorry, darling, I didn't mean to tickle. And, I know, honey, we'll have lots of cuddle and kiss time when we're all done. He baby talked her too, and I tried to tune it out. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I did pause long enough to get my $75. I felt a little dirty. On the way home, I called Haley, and she laughed her guts out. I was trying to complain, and she was rolling with laughter. I told her to watch her step, or I'd make her crochet all the naughty gear for Cythera. She started laughing again. I told her I would make her drive out to Mort's place to fit all that stuff in Cythera, and she kept laughing. Oh my God, Haley said. Can I? That was a double nope. Nope, because I didn't need Haley getting even wackier ideas than she already did. Nope, because that's a client, and I didn't know if she could keep a straight face. Nope, because it was like a Barbie mansion, and I didn't need that stuff popping up where I lived. Nope, just because. Okay, it was more than a double nope. All in all, I spent 2 months working exclusively on Cythera's wardrobe. Between designing the kinky stuff and making everything to her dimensions, it was 2 solid months of work. I turned away orders from other customers and promised it will all return to normal in a couple weeks. I can ship you about 2/3 of the stuff you ordered, I emailed Mort. I can email you the invoice and it will include just those items and the charges for design. Wonderful, he replied. Just let me know the shipping and I'll add it to the invoice. That was a load off my mind. I shipped off a huge container of clothing and emailed the invoice with shipping to Mort. I had some finishing up type of stuff to do on the rest of the clothes, sewing on rhinestones and bows, putting in elastic, just little touches. I figured I could get it all done in 3 or 4 days. Getting this wardrobe project done would get this whole creepy thing behind me. Hell, I could take a little vacation. A couple days would do me good. I emailed Mort that I was getting ready to ship the second container. All the same things. Invoice, shipping. It looked like I was about to be a free man. My bank account flourished. Boom! Up several grand for the first shipment. Boom! Up another couple grand for the second one. All good, right? Well, kind of. The email started. No complaints. Lots of praise, lots of appreciation in the first email. Cythera just loved every single thing. It was the attachments that made my stomach lurch. Mort sent me a couple of pics. Gritting my teeth, I opened the first. Haley was literally walking behind me while I had my laptop open, checking my email. As soon as she heard me say, "Oh damn," under my breath, she stopped to look. She's pretty. Who's that?" she asked. "It's Maud's doll." She leaned over me. She looks so real. No, when you're looking at her, she's not so real. I didn't mention how soft and delicate her skin was. The first pic was Cythera in a crop top and leggings. The second was Cythera in the moonlight wearing the lace gown. Hayley was breathing on me. Oh my God, that is so beautiful. A couple days later, I got the second email. More compliments, more appreciation. A link. Why did I click the link? Glutton for punishment. It led me to a folder of pics. All Cythera. All different poses. Sweaters, halter tops, shorts, sheath dress. Every time I looked at her face, particularly her eyes, it creeped me out even more. Then came the email with the bondage pics. Cythera in wrist restraints, Cythera in a half-cut bra and fishnet stockings, Cythera in a dog collar. There were more pics I just kind of skimmed right over, because it looked like there was a lot of skin showing. I couldn't tell if it was his or its, and didn't want to see either. Luckily, Hayley was shopping with her mom. I deleted the email. I wasn't so lucky with the next set of photos. Hayley was right by my cell when I got an alert for a new email. I want to see, she said. I told her no. Then she wanted to know why. She demanded to know why. I had to weigh this out. Which was worse, telling her why I didn't want to see the email, or showing her? It was impossible to figure out, so when she asked me to hand over my phone, I gave it to her. This is all on you if it's freaky, I warned. It was from Mort. It wasn't a long email, and just a couple attachments. He and Cythera were engaged. The pictures in the attachment were not what I feared. The first was an engagement announcement type photo. I smiled, thinking, I bet that photographer was surprised. And I bet that didn't get published in the local paper. The second was a picture of their hands entwined. Damn if it didn't look real. Hayley asked, Is that a diamond ring? That was a huge rock on the delicate finger of a doll. Not even 6 months later, I charged Mort $20,000 for a bridal gown and veil. Because he was so antsy about it, I got insurance on the package. He sent an extra $5,000 because he said, I went beyond what they expected, and Cythera was over the moon. He attached the pic of Cythera looking at the dress. It's bad luck for me to see her in the gown before we're married. I felt conflicted about the extra money, but I didn't return it. An invitation for the wedding never came. Hayley was disappointed. She was going to buy a dress for it. She wanted to look at the beautiful doll in Mort's place. She called it the dollhouse. Myself, I was okay not being invited to that horror show. I would have declined if I got the invite. How in the hell would Mort get the dress on her while not looking at her? Would there be an actual preacher? Or would they use another damn doll? Would Mort literally say, I do for her? Like in a girly voice? Nope. It was a triple nope. In time, I completely forgot about Mort. I refused to use pink yarn for anything, but I didn't really think about why I hated that colour. Sometimes I would remember Cythera's skin and feel weird, but for the most part, I didn't think about them at all. Life went on. Sometimes I got weird requests, like crocheting boobs out of velvet yarn or making a carrying sack for someone's enema supplies. Nothing stranger than people, man. Nothing stranger. So, yesterday, I got an email out of the blue. At first, I thought it was from Monty, and I couldn't remember anyone with that name. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. It was from Mort. No attachments. He was asking how much I would charge. for a baby blanket. Hello, my name is Mike, and I'm a systems engineer for a bank that you've probably never heard of. I have a little time on my hands right now, so I thought I might share my story to see if anyone else has had something similar happen to them. Everything is fine, and there's no reason to be concerned. Please, listen to my story, and if you can respond without panicking, I would appreciate your input. Sheila and I met on the East Coast in one of the largest cities there. I won't specify which, so I don't have to worry about complications later. Our relationship moved quickly, and pretty soon we were living together, and before we knew it, we were married with a child on the way. Our place was nice, but every year, the storm season brought the possibility of home loss. So, rather than constantly worrying about losing our place and all our belongings, we decided to move west. Our daughter, Elaine, was 6 years old by the time we decided to make a change. She had always been quiet, but a couple months before leaving, she was finally diagnosed with a learning disability. We moved into our new house at the beginning of summer. We had struggled to find a school that could provide the help she needed. When we finally found a place that could help care for her, the instructor called us in after the first week. She had always been quiet. She focused on her drawing. She would turn off TVs, radios, and anything else that might distract her. Most of the time, you didn't even see her face, just the top of her head as she focused on her work. As she got older, she continued to focus on her art. Other children branched out, made friends, began to communicate, but not Elaine. Elaine stayed locked in her own world, where she constantly focused on reflecting everything she saw through her pen. Sheila took things harder than I did. At first, she thought it was a phase, that Elaine was just shy and preferred to stay in her own world. She wasn't too concerned, but as the months went by without improvement, Sheila got more scared. It started with her lashing out at me. "You're never around. How do you think she's supposed to get better if you never spend time with her? I spend time with her as much as I can. We both have jobs. There's only so much time in a day. You think this is my fault? I'm saying that I have a full-time job and still spend time with her. Why can't you? Does your job stop you from helping just like me?" Then she started lashing out at Elaine. It must have been a weekend, back when we lived in our old house. I remember watching Elaine sitting next to the window during an afternoon rainstorm. She was frantically trying to capture the motion of the willows that lined our backyard when Sheila called for her. Sheila wanted Elaine to come to the kitchen for a musical therapy. Elaine did not respond. She was completely enraptured with the rainstorm, watching the willows writhe in the shower and breeze. Sheila called Elaine again, more insistent this time. I could hear impatience beginning to curdle in Sheila's voice. "Elaine, your mother's calling you." Elaine's head swiveled to look at me before turning back to the rainstorm. Sheila must have heard me, because a moment later, she came marching out into the living room. It sounded like she was trying to drive her feet through the floor by stomping. Elaine remained oblivious until Sheila grabbed her arm at the elbow. Sheila shouted her first, middle, and last name, as if using the complete thing would guarantee her attention. Taking Elaine's elbow, she began to lift her from the seat. With the connection to her subjects broken, Elaine unloaded a guttural hiss at Sheila and promptly took a swing at her with her free arm, nearly tearing Sheila's prized Celtic braid necklace. The fist arced wide, missing her mother. Aghast, Sheila jerked Elaine's arm, throwing her off balance, and brought her hand up, slapping Elaine. I rose from my chair, but had not tried to stop what was clearly in motion. Elaine broke free of Sheila's grasp and ran off to her room. She slammed the door and proceeded to demolish her possessions in a fit of rage. This wasn't the worst, or even the first incident with Elaine, but it felt like a turning point. The point when Elaine began to drift away from Sheila. I had hoped the move might put some distance between our family and those feelings, but I think we brought it with us, just like our other baggage. We arrived at the school. We would see what I now know was the first sign something was terribly wrong. After checking in at the office, we made our way towards Mrs. Northam's room. Everything was clean. The halls reflected a modern school, built and maintained with care. The brown tiling on the floor could almost hold a reflection, while the lockers that lined the walls were freshly painted avocado green. We waited outside of Mrs. Northam's classroom for several minutes before she checked outside for us. Peeking around the door, she invited us in and motioned at 2 padded armchairs across from her desk. "Thank you for coming in today. What did you want to see us about? Is Lane adjusting to the class all right?" "Well, she seems to be engaging with the activities and doing her classwork. But there was something else I wanted to talk with you about." Her heavy tone betrayed her trepidation about discussing the matter further, but she seemed to steel herself before going on. Mrs. Northam's quivering hand sank under the desk as she went for the drawer. The locking mechanism clicked open, and the bearings squealed as she opened it. She reached in and withdrew a manila envelope containing several pieces of A4 paper, clearly marked up with pen and crayon markings, and set it on the table. "Many children use art as a way to process issues at home, but I've never seen anything like this. Your daughter is obviously talented, but the subject of her drawings are troublesome." She reached into the folder and took a drawing from the top and set it before us. The scene depicted Sheila, curled up on a familiar green carpet, being torn apart and eaten by 3 strange figures. They appeared to be jet black mummies. Their arms and legs were stick thin, with their joints knobbed grotesquely. Their arms ended in long, thin hands with sharp, talon-like claws. The skin and faces reminded me of photos of bog mummies whose skin had been stained black by water. They appeared to be crouching around Sheila, peeling her skin and tearing flesh away. The drawing seemed to capture a moment when they had been interrupted, the 3 figures turning to look at the artist. No eyes, just empty sockets where eyes should be. My stomach started to turn. Some things did not benefit from Elaine's high-definition art style. I turned to Sheila to take in her response. She sat in the chair, arms crossed, tight-lipped, trying not to betray any response to the picture. "We try not to make children ashamed to express their creative side," droned Mrs. Northam, "especially in situations where there are communication issues. However, Elaine's skills made her drawing choices particularly upsetting for the other students." She explained that she had held onto the drawing because she did not want to press it as an issue unless Elaine made more of them. "Elaine drew this earlier in the week." Mrs. Northam reached into the folder resting between them and revealed a second drawing, clearly in the same realist style that Elaine had used for her other pictures. It depicted one of the black mummies from her previous drawing emerging from a husk-like skin of a woman. The thing was disrobing on a familiar green carpet. Where had I seen that carpet before? It reminded me of a cicada emerging from its pupal shell. Sheila maintained a poker face, trying not to betray any sense of betrayal or revulsion. Inspecting the drawing a second time, I recognized the dress. It was one of Sheila's. She had worn it several weeks ago. Sheila maintained her icy, unreactive shell throughout the remainder of Mrs. Northam's presentation. The teacher made some suggestions about ways we could encourage Elaine to focus on other subjects in her art, then finished the discussion with a pep talk about how Elaine was making real progress. That part of the conversation didn't really stick with me. The drawings, those remained. We took the drawings and agreed to speak with Elaine about her art. As we walked back to the car, the dam started to break. Sheila began to let down her guard. None of the implications from Elaine's drawings were particularly flattering. Elaine had always drawn things from life, never any of the typical phantasms that populate children's drawings. Did Elaine really see a mother like that, consumed by decrepit horrors and becoming one? As we got to the car, Sheila threw her face into my chest and began to gently weep. I nuzzled her head, trying to comfort her. I don't know. We got into a Honda CR-V and began to drive home. I was behind the steering wheel while Sheila held the drawings. They were encased in a manila envelope, as if it could protect us from the contents. I focused on the road while Sheila absent-mindedly stared out the window while a quiz program from NPR played in the background. I didn't notice until it was too late. Sheila opened the folder, removed the drawings, and began tearing them apart. "What are you doing?" "What the teacher should have done," Sheila responded, then lowered the passenger side window, dumping the fragments into the wind. Once we got home, Sheila marched directly to Elaine's room to confront her. I heard shouting, screaming, and finally stomping as Sheila came down the stairs with Elaine's art supplies. She marched over to the fireplace in our new house and dumped her supplies into the hearth. Everything went in, nothing would escape. She barked, "Go get a light, Mike." And then, to my lingering regret, I went to the kitchen and returned with a lighter. Sheila took it and stooped down. She began wadding drawings and placing them like tinder. Then, with a few rakes of the lighter's wheel, the remains of Elaine's hobby were burning. The fire spread quickly, and soon, all of the tools and papers were engulfed. Later, Elaine came downstairs and bore witness to her loss. She returned upstairs to sob, grieving over the loss of her expression. After this initial burning, Sheila instituted a general prohibition on Elaine's art. Periodically, in the following weeks, Sheila would find napkins with sketches. These always found their way to the fireplace. A few times, I caught glimpses of her pictures. The black mummy figures from her school drawings made regular appearances. In some pictures, they stood over beds, leering ominously. In other drawings, they seemed to be occupying the house, enjoying the amenities. All these drawings, or should I say warnings, were promptly ignored and destroyed. After Sheila began confiscating Elaine's art, their relationship sank even further. Elaine had been making progress and becoming more communicative before art was banned. She would smile when people she recognized entered the room. She now frowned and hissed at Sheila. She would still slip me a picture occasionally. It was always a picture of one of the black mummy things. Elaine and Sheila's drawn-out conflict fed into how I fathered her. Previously, if Elaine had a nightmare, I would go to comfort her. Now, anytime there was an issue, Sheila would assume control, getting out of bed to comfort Elaine, or at least put her back to sleep. Despite being the exclusive source of comfort for Elaine, her and her mother's relationship had only grown more fraught. Within the last couple weeks, Elaine has even refused to eat food Sheila has prepared for her. The second time she refused, I broke down and tried making Easy Mac, which she ate happily. This then touched off an argument between me and Sheila about who was in control of the parent-child relationship. I had just taken a long weekend. Since Elaine was no longer allowed art supplies in her class, she had lost so much of her motivation to go. This made it difficult to get her out of the house, but made her quite happy with a long weekend. Going to work on Tuesday, after the long weekend, was a letdown. The managers seemed to expect you to fit all of the work you didn't do on your day off into the remaining 4 days. After a hectic workday, I pulled into our house's driveway. Popping open the front door, I slid out of the front seat of the CRV and grabbed my work satchel. I walked along the driveway and traced my steps up to the front porch. I stepped up to the front door and grabbed the knob and pushed. The door slid open quietly on its freshly oiled hinges. Stepping into the foyer and onto the green carpet, I was greeted by the sound of Sheila working in the kitchen. "Hello, honey. How was work? Come get some wine from the kitchen." I ambled left, down the hallway to the kitchen. Left-hand side of the hallway was taken up by a large walk-in closet with a door at the front. As I moved closer, the door silently opened. Rather than some boogeyman, Elaine stepped out of the closet and ushered me inside. I think now it would have been better to stay outside and remained ignorant. Playing along, I quickly stepped inside with her. She silently closed the door and flicked on a flashlight. At first, I was blinded by the light, pointing at my face. Elaine then aimed it deeper in the closet, past the coats, past the boxes, at the part of the closet I hadn't explored since we first moved earlier in the summer. Leaning against the wall was a long bundle. Black plastic bags were wrapped around a load that I didn't recognize. Why was there a carpet wrapped up in plastic bags resting in our closet? I looked back at Elaine, but she just gestured forward towards the bundle. It certainly hadn't been there when we unpacked. I wended my way through the boxes and clothes to have a closer look. I almost knocked over one of the particular stacks of boxes containing shoes, but caught myself before they were dislodged. The bundle itself leaned against the wall in the far corner. Squaring myself up to the wrappings, I reached out and began to tug at the top. The bags were wrapped tightly, forcing me to pull my pocket knife out. My delicate hacking started to yield progress with a decrepit package. Layers of plastic gave way to what appeared to be leather. Peeling the sack apart revealed a dark, leathery visage. It looked like a face made of jerky. Recognition began to lap at my heels. I felt as if the bottom of my stomach had fallen out. My knees turned to rubber. Bile began to creep up my throat. But when I turned to vomit, I was transfixed by Elaine's stare. I tried to tuck the plastic sheeting back in place to deny the existence of what I saw. Elaine's stare bore into me. She had always known. Reflecting on her change in behavior, it all started to make a kind of sense. The intensified conflict with her mother, the drawings. I had ignored every sign that something was happening since we moved. Swallowing my bile, I turned back to the bags and continued loosening the wrappings. I tried to avoid looking at the face while I went about my work. As I got further, I found a small silver chain hanging about the neck, holding a Celtic braid. It was caked with blood, but it was unmistakable. It was the one that belonged to Sheila. It occurred to me that maybe Elaine's drawings were a more direct warning than a cry for help. The picture of the black mummy creature emerging from Sheila's skin flashed through my head. Was it emerging or entering? I realized where I'd seen that green carpet before. It was the same carpet we had gotten when we moved into the house, the very carpet that laid in the foyer outside. I was ready to confront Sheila, or whatever that thing was. I made my way back towards the closet door, but Elaine threw her arms up as if to prevent me from leaving the closet. I'm lucky she did, because in the next moment, we heard faint footsteps coming from downstairs. Tap, 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 tap. She turned the flashlight off. Light shone from underneath the closet door. Then, two shadows, a matching pair of feet, traversed the doorway. From the look on Elaine's face, it was clear that the shadows belonged to something that we should be avoiding. We could hear faint voices, even through the closet door. I crouched next to it and held my ear to the door crack of the closet. I couldn't understand what was being said, but it sounded like Sheila, talking with a crackly, reedy voice. Suddenly, they stopped speaking. There was silence in the closet. Our doubt shielded us from having to know what was outside. The urge to hide washed over me in waves. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and put it on silent. I leaned against the wall of the closet and slowly slid down to my ass. I'm not sure what to do now. I've been sitting here thinking about everything for the last half an hour. Elaine is watching me intently now. Periodically, we hear more footsteps and more of the crackly, reedy speech. It is now well past the time I normally come home. Sheila heard me come in. I'm really worried. Worried that if I leave the closet, Sheila, or the thing wearing Sheila's skin, won't have time to pretend to be Sheila. Worried that this time, the Sheila thing will decide not to pretend. Worried about what will happen to Elaine, who is apparently always known. Whatever I do, I need to choose fast. Sheila just texted me. "Where are you?" Winky face. My neighbour won't stop singing Christmas carols. It's a little bit ridiculous to hear Deck the Halls not long after Halloween. I mean, I'm all for the spirit of Christmas and I'm no Grinch, but to wake up at 6 AM on November and hear my neighbours singing was enough to irritate me. I've lived in this house going on 3 years, and I know the neighbours in the sense that we've waved while taking care of our yards and discussed the weather if we happen to see each other outside while taking the trash cans out or checking the mail. A nice family of 3, or 4 if you include their dog Cello. I've seen them decorate the house for all the major holidays, and last year they at least waited until after Thanksgiving to start putting up Christmas lights and such. Our houses are not made of paper either, and we both have a decent enough yard that I've never heard so much as a loud television or even music come from that house. So, this is the first time I've ever heard them singing, and they must be really going all out for it to carry this well. When it woke me at 6, I attempted to cover my head with my pillow, which didn't work. Then I turned on an ambient white noise sound, and thankfully that lulled me back to sleep. The problem is that when I woke up at a comfortable 8 AM, they were still singing. Not Deck the Halls, but now they were singing Joy to the World. Again, it's November. I've tried to shrug it off and go about my morning. I took a hot shower and brushed my teeth, made some toast and slipped on my work shoes, all while hearing Joy to the World. They must be singing the song several times each, because I know for a fact they started with Deck the Halls. I usually left my house through the carport door, but I wanted to check out their house and see if these maniacs had already decorated their house as well. When I stepped out of my front door, I immediately noticed the wife and daughter standing on their doorstep in their night clothes. They were both facing the inside of the house and singing to their husband, Arnold, or as he liked to be called, Arnie, who stood in the doorway with one hand on the door as if he'd just opened it. these people were caroling their own house. And the daughter, I think her name was Tanya or something like that, probably should be in school. "Taking a sick day, folks?" I asked with a raised voice to call over the singing. They didn't reply, so I stepped closer to my vehicle in the driveway and looked back towards their house again. Arnie looked back at me with just his eyes and a wide grin that looked strained. "You guys taking requests?" I asked. Again, they didn't reply. Not very Christmassy of them to ignore me, I thought, before climbing into my vehicle and heading to work. I got home at 4, and they were still singing. Right now, it's silent night. The wife and daughter are still in their night clothes, and Arnie still held the door wide open. First thing I did when I pulled in was honk a few times to try and get their attention, but they didn't stop. They didn't even turn their heads to look at me. I stepped out of the car and started across the small patch of grass that separated our houses. I was in his lawn and maybe 5 feet from them when I heard something else. Something mixed in with the singing. I stopped and tried to isolate the sound. It seemed to be coming from inside. I looked up and caught Arnie's eyes. It was him. He was making noises through his wide, forced smile and clenched teeth. I froze and stared at him. "Arnie, what's going on here? Are you guys okay?" I asked nervously. He grunted back, his eyes shifting left to right quickly. I took it as a no. I stepped forward again, but he grunted so loudly that I recalled back to where I was. "Arnie, what's going on?" I asked, not sure of how he could explain with grunts. I looked at his wife and daughter quickly. The poor girls were shoeless, standing in small, half-dried puddles of their own urine. Arnie as well. They had stood there all day long. "Arnie?" I didn't even know what to say. I could barely think over the damn singing. I could hear their voices breaking a bit. Surely they would lose their voices soon. Another loud grunt, and I looked back to Arnie. His eyes were darting over his left shoulder. Without getting closer, I tried to peek into the open house. Between his wife and daughter, and under his arm, I could see what looked like a Christmas tree they had set up. A tall tree, so thickly covered in dark green pine needles that I could barely make out the full shape of it. It hadn't been decorated yet, but boxes of ornaments and lights were at its base. "The tree?" I asked. Arnie groaned once, loudly, in acknowledgement. I crouched a little to see the tree more. Their dog Cello lay at the tree's trunk. A branch protruded from the dog's stomach in a mixture of blood and fur. I wanted to gag. It looked like one of them had made me stab the dog with a branch. No, the branch was still attached to the tree. I hesitated and took a step closer to see around the doorframe. Arnie squealed in protest. As he did, the tree nervously shook, and the branches retreated back into the pine quickly. This was enough for me. I turned and unlocked my front door quickly, stepped in and slammed it closed, all while hearing the girls' broken voices singing "We Wish You Merry Christmas." I pulled out my phone and called 911. As soon as the operator answered, I gave them my address and tried to explain what I had seen. The operator seemed unsure, but said they would send someone over anyway. When I hung up, I heard a faint voice outside. I checked through the blinds and saw the neighbour from the other side of Arnie's house storming across his yard and shaking his fist at them. "God damn it, Arnold, shut these women up and do this inside your house, not out here where all of us have to listen to this crap all day," barked the neighbour. I didn't know his name, He was moving quickly towards them. I opened my door and stepped outside. "Sir, hang on," I said hesitantly, not really sure what I was even stopping him from. He didn't hear me at all, or was so enraged that he tuned me out. He crossed his yard and into theirs. I looked past him and saw who I assumed to be his wife, an equally elderly woman, standing at the door looking over. "Hello? Earth to Wendy? Earth to Arnie? Did you hear a damn word I said?" He reached them, and he stopped talking. He froze about 6 inches closer to them than I had gotten. He turned to face Arnie and opened his mouth and began to sing along with them. His raspy old voice mixed in with the voices of Wendy and their daughter, Tanya. "Ben! Ben, what are you doing? Ben?" called the other neighbour's wife. She stepped onto the grass of her own yard. This time I yelled out, Don't go near them." "What is he doing? What are any of them doing?" she asked, confused. "I don't know what's going on," I replied truthfully. Cautiously, I walked across their yard until I was in front of the door, but far enough from it that I didn't think I was going to start singing anytime soon. I looked at Arnie, who had tears running down his widely grinning face. I walked further around until I was closer to the other neighbour. I looked back at the carolers and could see the mother and daughter's faces were wet with tears, but still, they sang. And the old man Ben, singing right along with them. Sirens cut through the Christmas carols as a patrol car came down the road towards us. I walked out to the curb and waved them down while I looked around to see the neighbours across the street had stepped out to watch, as well as the neighbours a few houses down. They all looked on, confused. The patrol car pulled up and 2 officers stepped out. The first was taller and bald. The second was older and just barely overweight. "What's going on here?" the tall one asked. I walked closer to them and quickly explained everything I could. It made no sense as I said it out loud, but the officers listened, each one turning a curious eye towards the carolers. "And you said this man started singing when he got close to them?" the other asked. "Yes, I got close, but obviously not as close as he did," I explained. "And you don't feel like singing?" the other asked with a slight smile. "No. Look, do you think I would have called this in if this wasn't serious?" I demanded. That officer stopped smiling and turned towards my neighbour's house. As he stepped towards them, I heard a car pull into a nearby driveway. I turned to see if it was another cop car. It wasn't, just one of the neighbours pulling in with her own dark green Christmas tree strapped to the top of the SUV. I turned back to the carolers and watched the older officer keeping a safe distance and calling out to them several times. No replies. The officer returned to us and shrugged. "I don't really know what I'm supposed to do here. They aren't breaking any laws exactly," said the officer that had gone forward. The taller officer began talking into his radio, explaining the situation to someone at what I assumed to be the police station. I looked around at the neighbours, standing about watching. Some had joined each other in discussion, all while this family and the man named Ben began to sing Jingle Bells. After a few minutes of waiting around, I looked back towards the neighbours in the SUV. They had removed their tree and disappeared into their house. Odd that 2 families should be setting up trees so soon. Odder that the trees look so similar. Same dark colour and excessive thickness to the pine needles. My stomach dropped. I turned to one of the officers. "Hey, they had a tree just like theirs," I said, pointing to the other house. As I did, the officers followed my pointing. We all looked over at the house about 4 down from mine as the front door opened and a woman stepped out. She turned to face the open house, where a man stood holding the door. His face was a wide, toothy grin, and she began to sing, perfectly in tune with my neighbours. They all sang. Well, it's been a couple of days since then. That's because things have gotten more and more strange around here. We tried a number of ideas. We did in fact use ropes to pull my neighbours from their doorsteps. Once they were at a safe distance, they snapped out of their trance or whatever it was immediately, dehydrated and half-starved. Once the police officers that showed up and I pulled all the neighbours to safety, I suggested that we burn the trees. None of them were too keen to burn their houses down at first. We weren't positive it was the trees because none of them could talk until their sore throat had healed up enough to give us an explanation. But once they could speak, they told us everything they knew. Apparently, my immediate neighbour, Arnie, and his family had gone to a local tree farm simply to enjoy the outdoors and scout some of the potential trees for the upcoming holiday. They had no intention of actually buying a tree this early. The poor man just wanted to take his wife and daughter out for some family time. He said that while they walked, their daughter, Tanya, had told them she saw something small moving between the trees. Her parents thought it was just a young imagination running wild. Whatever it was had led Tanya and her family to a certain area of the tree farm where all the trees were tall and heavily laden with dark green pines. Arnie said the rest is sort of blurry, like a dream, but he remembers feeling obligated to take a tree home immediately. They used tools from the barn and cut the tree down themselves. None of them remember paying for the tree or even driving home. The other neighbour that had set up their tree second had a very similar experience. I found out that their names are Dylan and Ashley, and this was their first year in the new house. Both families mentioned seeing something moving between the trees, sort of leading them to the part of the tree farm where the thick trees were. Since nobody wanted to risk being forced to sing Christmas carols non-stop, the police and a few others in the neighbourhood used drones to see what was going on. We used the drones to go into the house and investigate the trees. Both houses had the same situation. The tree was set up and decorations were placed around the base. The families then must have been forced to begin singing while whatever was in the tree consumed the family pet. For Arnie, their pet cello still lay at the base of the tree, now emptied of blood. For Dylan and Ashley, they had a cat. Had. While we discussed our options on how to handle this, one of the drones was knocked down by something inside the tree. When we replayed the video, we could see a long, narrow, what looked like a branch, reach out of the tree and smack the drone to the floor. It then made a gurgle and a click noise and receded back into the tree. The police left the affected families in the hospital while they roped off their houses. They sent units out to the tree farm to investigate, and 2 patrol cars remained behind to keep an eye on the houses. That was the last I talked to the police. I came home and looked up whatever I could online. The closest thing I can think of is some kind of trickster goblin called a Kilikansaros. But aside from the pure absurdity of it, these creatures weren't supposed to appear until the 12 days of Christmas, being December 25th to January 6th, so they were extremely early. I kept peeking through the blinds as I did what research I could. The neighbour's door had been closed, I'm assuming by use of ropes. But knowing what had just happened, I couldn't help but be curious. Not white people in a haunted house curious, but curious enough to keep an eye on the house. Surprisingly, the news hadn't picked up the story, and no announcements had been made about staying away from the tree farm. I called one of the officers that had left me their card, hoping for an update or an explanation, but he didn't answer. I was ready to call it a night. when I saw movement next door. It was quick, but sent a shadow across the window. It caught my attention, and I began to stare across the yard. It looked like a bush itself, scurrying across the kitchen. It used dark, thin arms to open cabinets, close and open the curtains, and even open the refrigerator. Its body was made up of the same thick, dark pine that the tree was. So much so that I started to wonder if what I had seen of the tree had been just the creature itself in hiding. I tried my phone again to alert the officers. No answer. I watched the thing move around the house quickly. Then another appeared, and another. Soon, I had my eye on 4 of these things trapped inside my neighbour's house. I called 911, but it only rang and rang. Now, I've called this number more than a few times, and I knew that in an emergency, if the nearest apartment didn't pick up, it would pass you through to the next nearest facility. It didn't do that. I hung up and pocketed my phone. Then I watched as these things moved into the living room and I lost sight of them. I went into my bedroom and pulled my pistol out of the nightstand. I remembered the 2 patrol cars that were on the street, so I opened up my front door very slowly and walked out into the driveway to get a better look at my neighbour's house. Their front door was open. I swore out loud and looked down the street towards Dylan and Ashley's house. Their door was open as well. These things had escaped. I turned towards one of the patrol cars. It was empty, and the door had been left open. That's when I heard it. Someone had started singing Silent Night. I followed the sound of the singing, at a safe distance, to the end of the street. Each of my neighbours' houses had their doors open, and the singing was much louder now, and sounded more like a choir than a single person. I looked back towards my house and watched, to my shock, as one of these pine goblins or whatever scampered into my house. I went to duck beneath a bush, hesitated to make sure it was in fact a bush. Once I verified that it was a shrubbery, I hid behind it. The creature half walked, half hopped through my house, opening doors and cabinets and knocking things over like misbehaved children in a store. It clucked or giggled when things broke. When it was certain that my house was empty, it scurried outside and moved in the direction of the choir. Passing in front of me by about 10 feet, I could make out its shape a little better. The thing looked like a pine needle version of Cousin from the Addams Family. It moved with small, branch-like spindly arms at its side and little branch-looking feet. I followed at a distance. It was fast. I had to jog a little to keep up, but not too fast because I didn't know exactly how big its sphere of influence was. About 5 blocks down, and passing dozens of open doors, I found the source of the singing. My neighbourhood had been gathered by these calicanteros, or pine goblins, or whatever they were, had apparently gone door to door, luring people to it. I watched as all of my neighbours and more walked in one large mass, all singing Silent Night, perfectly in sync. I couldn't see the front of the pack, but I imagined that's where most of the pine goblins were, leading the pack. A few of them walked or danced at the sides of the singing people. They were escorting them somewhere, like a herd of cattle. Some of the creatures would stop at houses and knock on doors. Others would attempt to open them, and if able to, they would step inside and be shortly followed out by one or more persons singing along to join the herd. We moved quickly, the mass slowly gaining more and more singers. After almost 20 minutes of walking, the herd of singers stopped moving. I was far behind, but I froze as well. the people kept singing. They sang without moving for about 10 minutes before starting to walk again. When I caught up to the spot they stopped at, my heart dropped into my stomach. There were at least 10 bodies lying on the ground, each one opened up and drained of blood. The creatures had stopped to feed. I tried my phone again. Still, no answer from emergency services. I could only imagine that they were somewhere singing along to Christmas carols. I continued to follow at a distance, noticing now that they would sing each song at a minimum of 4 times back to back before switching to another. It was always Christian songs and just the classics. We walked for miles. A few times the herd would get close to a passing car. The first time it happened, I got excited just seeing another person. But when the car got close, it slowed, stopped, and the people inside would join the herd, singing with the others. It seemed like the area of influence was bigger with this herd, possibly because there were so many of the pine goblins. I was scared before, but when I heard singing from another direction, I started to lose hope. I looked over, across the highway, to see another herd being shepherded by these creatures. It was a larger herd than this one, with dozens of the small green cousin-it creatures around them. I backed off even further, thinking that once these herds combined, there would be no telling how large the influence would be. I slowed down, and that's when I heard someone. Hey buddy! I spun around, pistol out. 3 people were crouched about 20 yards behind me. Whoa, we're not like them. You hear us? Nobody's singing, one of them said. I lowered my weapon. How long have you been following me? We've been watching you for almost an hour, but you were too close, and we didn't want to risk them hearing us, explained the man about my age, maybe 25. Any idea what those things are? I asked. Not really. We know they communicate with clicks and grunts and they drink blood, he said. This time another spoke, a tall woman with black hair. None of these people were familiar to me. A couple days ago, I watched my neighbours carry a tree into their house. I don't think they can only make you sing. I think they can make you set the whole damn tree up, and I've seen piles of decorations at the base of the tree, like some kind of tribute or something. A couple hours later, they started singing. They didn't stop until the police came and pulled a kid out with a rope. His mom was dead by the time they got there. We moved slowly and distantly, explaining what we had seen and heard while we followed the mass of Christmas carolers. A few more miles, another stop while the creatures ate, and we started seeing less and less new people joining. We started walking through areas that looked to have been hit already. Doors were already open, and the creatures didn't stop to check houses anymore. I hate Christmas carols, even in December, muttered the other guy. Where are we going? Asked the youngest of the group, a teenager, Kelly. The rest of us looked around the area, the sounds of Noel carrying across the space between us and the herd. The only thing this direction is the tree farm, the woman said. We stopped and looked back towards the town, our home, left empty while its inhabitants sang Christmas carols and marched towards what we can only imagine as the source of these pine goblin creatures. I logged in as much of this as I could while we were walking. We still have a way to go. We've started gathering supplies from the empty houses, and we each have a backpack with some food and drink. I'm not sure what we're going to do when we reach the tree farm, but we better come up with some ideas, quick. It took some time for us to make it to the tree farm. The creatures we took to calling pines stopped and fed several times and carry the choir at a slow pace. We were always careful to stay far enough back that we weren't drawn to the endless singing. We walked, mostly in silence, unsure of what to say to each other, while we watched an entire town of people marching and singing what used to be songs of praise and joy, but were now a melody of doom. We would take turns speaking to the youngest, the teenage girl named Kelly. We had learned that both her parents and a younger brother were part of the mass now. She had been in the shower while the Pines had taken her family. She had come downstairs to an empty house and an open door with the sounds of silent night echoing from outside. The man, roughly my age, named Timothy, he and his boyfriend Eric had followed the crowd when they first saw it, until Eric had recognized the friend and gotten too close. Eric was somewhere in the crowd now. The tall woman, named Sarah, lived alone but had witnessed the Pines going door to door and taking neighbours one by one. When they had come to collect her, she had blocked the door and windows with furniture and hid in her attic. Once she was sure they had gone, she followed and joined the others. And so, of our entire town, as far as we knew, it was only the four of us that did not sing at all. We reached the tree farm at just past 3:30 a.m. when the air was wet and cold. I kept the pistol tucked away, unsure what a bullet would even do to one of these pines. But we'd stopped along the way and managed to pass a gas station where Kelly and Timothy split off and filled a few containers with gasoline. We were now armed with a pistol, 4 gallons of gasoline in various containers, and each of us carried a lighter and some matches. We had already decided that, if given the opportunity, we would burn the farm to the ground. We followed the death choir down the driveway, all while hearing the croaked, hoarse voices singing Christmas carols. Their voices had left most of them some time ago, and we could only imagine what pain they were feeling in their throats. We hung back as the crowd entered into the tree farm. We then watched as individual pines would lead small groups into the trees within the farm. The herd was breaking apart. The singing became spread out. They walked single file through the trees until the driveway was empty and all that could be seen were trees, and all that could be heard was singing. "Well, what do we do now?" asked Sarah. I didn't know what to say or what to do, so I looked at each of them, hoping someone had a plan. "We need to burn the farm down, but we can't do it with everyone spread out like they are. We need a way to separate them from the pines," Timothy explained. "Yeah, if we start a fire, we don't know how well it will spread, if at all," said Sarah. Before anyone could expand, a short whoosh sound was heard, along with a small flash of light. We quickly jerked our attention towards the newly risen flames. Kelly had started pouring gasoline from her containers and was now lighting the area nearest to us on fire. We watched as she tossed a match on a tree and it erupted into flames. "What are you doing? What if it spreads?" demanded Sarah. "It's supposed to," said Kelly defiantly. The singing faded and the sounds of chirping and clicks grew louder. Without waiting, I too began to douse the nearest trees in gasoline. Wait, you could burn everyone inside the farm," cried Timothy. "They are as good as dead if we don't do anything, and if we can't get close to them, this is our only option," I said, lighting a match and tossing it into a tree. The would-be Christmas tree exploded into fire. I looked back at Timothy, who hesitantly doused more trees with gasoline. Kelly was now moving deeper into the tree farm, pouring lines of gasoline behind her. "Kelly, be careful," Sarah called to her. Kelly eagerly splashed gasoline on the trees in front of her, then threw the container into the farm. The chirps and clicks grew louder, almost as loud as the singing at the edge of the tree farm as the flames began to burn brightly. Then I saw it. Movement between the trees. The fire had drawn one of the pines towards us. "Everyone, get back! One's here," I called out. Timothy and Sarah backed away from the trees quickly. Kelly pulled another container out and continued to douse the trees. "Kelly, get out of there!" Sarah cried out. The young girl angrily flung gas in every direction. The pine stopped several yards in front of her. Kelly paused for a moment. Then the pine began to move towards her. With a grunt of force, Kelly flung the container at the pine, striking it in the center. Gas splashing up around it and then pulled around its feet. The creature stopped and sniffed the air curiously. "Shoot it!" Timothy ordered. I drew the pistol. "Kelly, get down!" I shouted. The girl dove to the ground and I fired. My shot missed as my hands trembled. The pine creature moved forwards again towards Kelly. It was close enough now. I aimed carefully as Kelly sat up. "Oh, come, all ye faithful," Kelly began to sing. Before she could stand up all the way, I fired again. The bullet struck the thing in the chest. I tensed for the pending explosion. Nothing. No fire, no burst, nothing at all. I'd expected the bullet to ignite the gasoline like in the movies, and now, with my gun in my hand, I realized how foolish the idea was. "Kelly, move!" I shouted to the singing girl as she began to stand up. She was lost in trance and would be joining her family in song. Then I saw a fireball being thrown from behind me. I ducked and spun around to see Timothy holding another flaming piece of wood. His first throw had landed on the pine creature, and now, at last, it burst into flames. The pine screeched and chirped wildly. It began to run in small circles, which only fanned the flames, feeding off the gasoline and pine needles that covered its body. The flaming monster ran so wildly that it ignited the gasoline-soaked trees around it. Kelly stopped singing and turned towards us. Sarah raced towards her and pulled her back from the tree farm. "Keep going!" Timothy yelled as he poured gasoline on the ends of anything he could find close by to throw at the tree farm. The singing was growing fainter now, as smoke began to rise in different parts of the tree farm. The creature had retreated to safety of its source, apparently not understanding that it had only spread the flames more. We hurled any flaming object we could into the tree farm and watched as tree after tree ignited. Something moved just out of the corner of my eye. I picked up a flaming branch and prepared to hurl it at the creature. A man started to cough and look around wildly. "What the hell is happening?" he asked, his voice cracked and hoarse. It was working. The man stumbled towards us. "Start burning the farm down," I commanded. "My family," he said hoarsely. "They'll come out, just like you did," I said, unsure of how much truth was in my words, but I knew that this was our only chance now. He then began to pick up flaming branches and throw them at the areas of the farm he had come from. The five of us now spread out and began throwing more and more fire into the farm until the entire farm appeared to be set ablaze. The singing was now mixed between hoarse call-outs and screams of confusion. We began to shout, "This way! Follow my voice! Get out of the fire! Come this way!" I shouted into the burning tree farm. One after another, people walked out, crawled and stumbled towards us from the burning tree farm. They coughed and clutched their throats. The singing was now almost entirely gone, and we could hear something more horrible replace it. True screams, as some of the people must have caught fire. We watched from outside the flames as many people would stop and roll on the ground to save themselves from the fire. Thankfully, it worked, and the more people came out, the more would go back to pull whoever they could from the fires. The pine creatures ran wildly, setting more and more trees on fire, thus killing each other in their panic and setting the cursed carolers free. We watched triumphantly as the Christmas tree farm burned brightly in the rising sun. People staggered out, one after another, and the sound of carolers was gone. Confused, injured, but alive, the people of my town stood outside of the flames and listened to the pine creatures chirping and grunting as their bodies burned and they continued to spread the fire. I sighed relief as Timothy raced around the crowds of people looking for his boyfriend Eric. I watched as Kelly was reunited with her family, and I listened, as did the rest of my friends and neighbours, as the pine creatures cried out in a melody of chirps and grunts that replaced the sounds of Christmas carols.